Hey, just got a phone call from Dr. Tartaglia. It's a medical emergency with a family member, and he won't be joining us. That's okay. Pum pum pum. Pum pum pum. Simulation University is about to get started. Pum pum pum. Pum, pum, pum. We gotta send the links to certain people. Oh wait, he can't arrive today. But this person can. Pum pum pum. Pum, pum. Okay, my computer programmed NPCs. Are you ready to become actualized? All right. One of the things I noticed is that I should have mentioned this last time, but some of the hangups that we were having that Dr. Tartaglia was kind enough to express, really, they will be dealt with as we continue in Aquinas. So we got to have to hold some questions up in the air. And let's get back to where we left off yesterday. All right. There's things in Aquinas you're going to need to know soon. There's a reason why this is part of our curriculum. This is the year 2 material. There's some stuff in here that you're going to need to know. You might not know that you need to know it right now, but you're going to need to know it, and you're going to need to know it soon. It's going to be impossible for many of you to come up with a reason why you're not in a simulation. That day's coming way faster than you think it is. The train is heading right towards you. And there's things in Aquinas, thought processes that will aid you in that time. There's a master plan here I haven't disclosed about why we're going into all this stuff. But instead of cherry picking and just going into a few things, we're going to really dig in and get to know the thinkers. It's more valuable that way. So let's continue where we left off. Okay. He was talking about the nature and extent of sacred doctrine and the idea that there might be religious pursuits based in faith, fidelity, that are legitimate, even though we're going to put ourselves in contradistinction to that pursuit, and we're just going to do philosophy. So with Aquinas, we're going to sit here and we're just going to use the rules of right reason and try to see how much truth we can come to. But so far, it seems strongly hinted and sometimes explicitly stated that there might be truths we can't get to this way, but that we could get to other ways. There might be truths that we can get to other ways, but we could also get to this way. And he's saying it's appropriate that you should be able to get to them other ways. Well, let's see. Do we take any notes here? So he's not even trying to justify philosophy. He's starting out with, we're going to do philosophy. But what about this other thing? Is there a religious way to get to truth through faith and revealed truth and things like that? Now he's going to ask the question whether sacred doctrine, that faith project, is itself a means of getting to knowledge. Is it a science? He doesn't mean science the way we mean science, so translated there. Objection 1. So once again, he'll give the question and then he'll give the answers that he doesn't believe. Then he'll say what he believes. Then he'll make an argument supporting what he believes. And then he'll reply to each of the objections. And then he'll move on to the next question. So we're starting to see the pattern here. And this question before us now is this other thing that we're not going to be doing, is it even legitimate? Is it a means to get to truth? We're not going to do it here. We're going to do philosophy here. But this other thing, we're not throwing it out. We're not saying it doesn't count just because we're doing this philosophy thing. So coming to truth through religious faith and revealed scriptures, is that legitimate? Objection 1, it seems that sacred doctrine is not a means to truth. For every science proceeds from self-evident principles, but sacred doctrine proceeds from articles of faith, which are not self-evident, since their truth is not admitted by all, for all men have not faith. Therefore, sacred doctrine is not a science. Again, that's an idea he's going to disagree with. Then he'll put another argument against his position. Objection 2 would be, further, no science deals with individual facts. But this sacred science treats of individual facts, such as the deeds of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and such like. Therefore, sacred doctrine is not a science. Let's try to break that apart. Individual facts means obviously facts specific to a singular character, okay? An individual subject. Now, the science of history does deal with deeds of characters in the past, but he's very wisely pointing out that there's something very different from a kind of objective science and things that have to do with characters. So we'll let that hang in the air for a moment. Now let's see his position. He'll state it and then he'll justify it with philosophical argument. So his position of whether or not it's a legitimate way to get to truth to do that religion thing properly, and there's probably a lot of I actually have there's some slides that we have from our year 1 introduction to religious or philosophy of religion that might be useful to put up here. So maybe we'll put those up. Let me see if I can grab them really quickly while we're doing this. Let's see, will time me how fast I can grab something like this. Hey, not too bad, not too shabby. We're getting there right now. All right, let's do this. Man, I'm organizing things quite well. We're getting to them fast. All right, let's see if we can just say, oh, this is the wrong thing. Okay, never mind. I was bragging about how quickly I got to something, and it wasn't the right something. Let's try this instead. Here we go. Okay. All right. So this is what Aquinas is talking about, the relationship between religion and philosophy. In our year 1 course, we talk about a two-way conversation between the two. We know what philosophy is, broadly speaking. It's the regime wherein the rules of right reason they're the schoolmaster. That's the final arbiter of things. We have to learn how to think and how to analyze our thoughts and see if they're self-contradictory or if they lead to absurd conclusions. And we're just going to logically beat to death propositional statements and bounce them back and forth and debate them together until we try to get closer to the truth. This religion thing can be reasonable. It can be done. You could say, well, let me, use reason as I examine revealed truth. But the highest principle here is not reason alone. Reason's not the schoolmaster in this game. We might throw out options, and I forgot to add the link. So anybody who's watching on X, I'm about to add the link here in the comments where you're watching so that you can join us if you want to add some ideas about what might be on the throne there. It might be faith, it might be God himself, it might be like fidelity, it might be revealed truth, it might be church tradition. So there's a comment there, and if you click on that, Dr. Tartaglia told us he can't make it at the last minute. He had a medical thing with a relative. So anyway, feel free to jump in. But back to this. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, lots of binaries, relationships between different ways of thinking. We probably don't need to go into all of this. This is the rest of that class. Okay. All right, let's just leave this on for now. Okay, so the rules that govern philosophy are different than the rules that govern science. The sciences say, be reasonable, don't say things that contradict themselves and stuff like that, but they have added restrictions. The added restriction is don't talk to me about anything that can't in principle have empirical consequence. Whatever you say to me that you want me to regard as meaningful has to be something where a measurable outcome that we can all observe and repeat the experiment on, that's the final arbiter. So it's philosophy with extra rules. And it allows it to do great things that you can't do without those extra rules, but it also limits it in scope for what it can consider. For one thing, the sciences themselves and the way we're using the word sciences is different than the way Aquinas is using it. Aquinas, I keep translating it in real time as something like a legitimate means to knowledge or something like that. That's much broader. So when he says science, he's including philosophy, he's including other things. He's not talking about empirical, post-Cartesian science. But the way we use the term now, it's limited to like the STEM fields in a sense. Um, but before he starts his philosophical project, and he's going to be staying in this realm the entire time, he's going to make some comments about. So he's going to be doing what we call the God of the philosophers. He's going to be philosophizing about the divine and figuring out how close he can come to truth about our nature and our relationship to God and what it ought to be, and all of the things that have to be propositional statements about the divine through philosophy. And so there's philosophical theology, and then there's revealed religion, and there's mysticism, and there's all these other camps that approach the same topic in different ways. Just like there's a philosophy of biology, there's a philosophy of science, but there's a philosophy of biology as well. But then there's also biology, and then there's also the history of biology, right? And it's important to be able to think in all these different ways to do any one of them as well. And there's almost even a unique relationship between philosophy and some of these other subjects. Philosophy kind of has to do its own history of philosophy just to do philosophy and vice versa. But he wants to talk for a moment. All right, since I'm going to talk about God so much, you might scratch your head and say, wait a minute, I go to church and I listen to the priest and he talks to me about God, and he talks very differently. He says, the scripture says this and the scripture says that. And we say, amen, hallelujah. And then we move on. And I'm not going to be doing anything like that. Right? I might reference a scripture verse to cite something, but I'm not going to say that's a reason why you should believe it. I'm going to give you reasons to believe things that are just based in you as a thinking person having access to the thoughts that you analyze inside your own head and the world that you can examine. So we're going to be doing philosophy here, but I'm going to be talking about God. So before I start, let me talk about these other ways. And he says, actually, I think I have reasons to believe that those are legitimate disciplines. He's not saying just because I'm going to do this philosophy thing that you should stop listening to the priest and come to me and I'll have the ultimate truth or more truths or anything like that. He's saying no, it's right that the priests and that the bishops and that the pope and that the whatever, that the faithful should pursue truth in the scriptures or in revealed truth or in their personal relationships with God or whatever. They can be wrong, they can be right, they can debate things, they can try to get it right, whatever. We're not going to do that game with them right now. We're going to do the philosophy game. And while we're doing it, we can criticize ideas that they come up with over there. We can recognize that we've come to some of the same ideas that they've come to over there. And we can first talk about the fact that I think it's reasonable that they should be able to do things in some of these other ways. Um, Now what he's going to do is say, well, it's reasonable that they should be able to, but what kind of knowledge, what kind of truth can they really come to by doing things that way? And he says, you might think that they can't come to real knowledge because it's about persons and characters and stories, and also because it doesn't seem to proceed from self-evident principles, right? How can you have a knowledge and a science if it's grounded on I just believe, right? So he says those are some good arguments against the idea that that other game would be legitimate. And then he says, on the contrary. So now again, he's going to give us his opinion, and then he's going to, let's see if we make this larger. He's going to give us his position, and then he's going to argue for it. So on the contrary, and he always, in his on the contrary, he quotes somebody, either the philosopher, who would always be Aristotle because he's a scholastic medieval. And so when he says the philosopher with a capital T, capital P, he means Aristotle. But right now he's going to cite Augustine. He says, Augustine says, to this science alone belongs that whereby saving faith is begotten, nourished, protected, and strengthened. Okay. So that's just a claim by somebody else, but he's going to cite it. And then he's going to say, but this can be said of no science except sacred doctrine. Therefore, sacred doctrine is a science. Okay, so he hasn't justified it yet, but his position is clearly going to be based off something like, if it can get you to a certain kind of knowledge, which would be saving faith, right? So if it alone can get you to that, this other discipline of devotion, um, the Methodists use methods to try to, but the faith disciplines of fasting and prayer and reading the scriptures and wrestling with the scriptures, and the scriptures, they come and let us reason together. So there's some philosophy in the scriptures, quite a bit actually. We will eventually have a chance to do some courses on Job and Ecclesiastes. There's quite a lot of philosophy in the Bible, but that discipline that's done differently than the game we're going to play. Aquinas is going to play the game of, let's use the rules of right reason and nothing else and see if we can't build a foundation and get to some truths. And he's already said we're going to get to a lot of the same truths that you can get to through faith, but not all of them. And this seems to be one. He seems to agree with Augustine that the only science that can get you to saving faith is the science and the discipline of pursuing knowledge in that other way. And he's not going to do that game right here. So he's saying you can't get saved by reading my book. That's quite a concession at the beginning. He's going to talk a lot about God and the nature of the fallen state of man and what salvation would be like and what God has done for us. He's going to give us lots of facts and lots of ideas that he thinks he can use just reason to get us to those things. But it seems like he agrees with Augustine that you can't get saving faith, something that actually transforms your life, in a way that well, in a transformative way, to be redundant, uh, by doing just philosophy. So he's granting a lot to this other discipline and then saying, yeah, but that's not what we're doing. What we're going to do is this right now. Okay, so let's see what his argument is for this. I answer that. I'm sorry. Should we do a simultaneous sip? Anybody have a beverage? A cup? Maybe you've got a flask, a glass, a tankard, a chalice, perhaps a thermos or a stein, a canteen, jug, or flask, a vessel of any kind, and you filled it with your favorite liquid, and I'm drinking water, and you could join me now for the unparalleled pleasure. The dopamine thing, the thing that there is no pleasure greater than this pleasure. It's unparalleled in most contexts. The thing that makes everything, literally everything, including our studies today, even better. It's called the simultaneous sip, and it happens right now. Go. Ooh, you feel the chills? Ah, nothing like the simultaneity. Okay. I answer that sacred doctrine is a science. There is knowledge you can come to that way. Okay. We must bear in mind that there are two kinds of sciences. Okay, it's a science, but we're going to qualify what we're going to make a distinction. You're going to get used to making distinctions with the scholastics. They'll take everything and they'll say, uh, purpose. Well, there's four kinds of purpose. There's ultimate purpose. There's practical purpose. They love making distinctions. So the first thing he's going to do is say, well, the first thing you have to realize is there's two kinds of science. Okay, what are the two kinds? Some which proceed from principle known by the natural light of intelligence, such as arithmetic and geometry. Okay, this is a great distinction. So that might be the a priori sciences, if we want to use more terminology that comes later. It might not perfectly overlap with that, but these are things that you could do if you were a brain in a vat with your eyes closed, just going, oneness and two-ness, I add them together, I get threeness, right? Okay, that's one. And there are some which proceed from principles known by the light of a higher science. Thus the science of perspective proceeds from principles established by geometry, and music from principles established by arithmetic. Okay, so this is a better and more interesting way of distinguishing things. Let's say we're going to pursue optics, all right? And so the beam of light hits a translucent medium and it bends it at a certain angle, and we measure the angle that the light gets bent, and then it comes out the other side and it bends at that same angle back to the way it was originally. And we start measuring all these things and say, okay, the beam of light, this material bends it this much, and then it bends it back this way when it comes back out into the air. what are we doing? Well, we're using geometry, which was one of those earlier sciences, that first kind. We're using geometry to make sense of the things that we're actually experiencing. So those are the two categories he's going to put them in. There's the knowledge. So again, science is ambiguous here from the way that we use it, but there's the means of coming to knowledge that are arithmetic and geometrical and things like that. They're sort of analytical thought principle, a priori, those types of categories. Those are not all synonyms, but those types of categories. And then there's the ones where we take these cognitive psychological structures. This is not him speaking, it's me putting other words on it. But we take these sophisticated cognitive structures that we can achieve through mathematics and the like, which, by the way, this is why Socrates says that the first thing we have to teach the philosopher kings is mathematics, because it teaches you how to organize the brain. So it's very much a psychological development tool. And then you can take those sophisticated structures and notice the patterns in the world and start applying them and having eureka moments where, oh, look at this. This sophisticated mathematical structure actually maps onto what's going on over here. And Aquinas, very interestingly, is making that a distinction between the two basic kinds of ways of coming to truth. There's the one which is sort of more grounded, and then the other one which requires that type of knowledge in order to make progress. Okay, that's the first thing he says. Then he says, so it is that sacred doctrine is a science because it proceeds from principles established by the light of a higher science, namely the science of God and the blessed. Hence, just as the musician accepts on authority the principles taught him by the mathematician, so sacred science is established on principles revealed by God. Okay, interesting. Let's just repeat what he said before we quarrel with it or agree with it or anything like that. We got to understand it. So he's saying, I'm going to put religious disciplines that attempt to get one closer to true saving, even saving knowledge of the divine, in the category of music and optics. I'm going to put it in the category of, he says, perspective and music. Okay. I'm going to put it in that second category and say it's a means of getting to truth that's based on another science. And that other science is revealed truth. Let's read this carefully. It proceeds from principles established by the light of a higher science. The higher science is the science of God and the blessed. Hence, just as the musician accepts on authority the principles taught to him by the mathematician, so sacred science is established on principles revealed by God directly. He's fine with saying all this. Now, notice if you're starting to object and say, now, wait a minute, I thought we were coming here to do philosophy, and now you're telling me that God's going to tell us things and we're going to believe them. He's not doing that because he's not going to be playing that game. All he's doing is saying it's legitimate for people to play that game. It's legitimate for them to play that game because there is a divine, which he hasn't proven yet, but will be proven through reason alone in coming up passages. So for now, we'll just hold it and say, okay, well, if you can prove there's God, and if you can show me that he would be speaking to us, and if he has a purpose to reveal truth to us, you still have to prove all of that. But if all of that's true, then yes, it would be true that if a person used this other discipline that's based in the foundations of those things, it would be a legitimate path to truth. That's his whole argument. He's not claiming more than that. He's not claiming a whole bunch of other things you might think are being smuggled in here. He's really breaking down his questions very, very smallly, right? The first question is, would it be necessary that we have this other science besides philosophy? Of like religious pursuit. And then he's saying, is that even legitimate? If it does exist, is it legitimate? He says, yeah, here's how it's legitimate. Now, you're going to have to take with a grain of salt until we get to the next few passages where he proves all those things that would need to be proven, but there's no way to start other than to just start somewhere. So we're going to start here. So let's see how he answers each of those objections. Reply to objection 1. The principles of any science are either in themselves self-evident or reducible to the conclusions of a higher science, and such, as we have said, are the principles of sacred doctrine. That's his answer to the objection. It seems that sacred doctrine is not a science, for every science proceeds from self-evident principles. He says, no, it doesn't. Not every science proceeds from self-evident principles. If you want to, if you want to study optics, you just take the truths of geometry. You don't have to know geometry too, because, well, for whatever reason, you can just accept the authority of the geometer that will tell you how angles work, and then you can use those same formulae for an ellipse and notice that the planets are following those paths if you want to study cosmology or something like that. Okay, reply to objection 2. Individual facts are treated of in sacred doctrine, not because it is concerned with them principally, but they are introduced rather both as examples to be followed in our lives. So this is more the truths to live by we're talking about. And he is very much addressing that characterological problem that came up in our last class, as in moral sciences, and in order to establish the authority of those men through whom the divine revelation on which this sacred scripture or doctrine is based has come down to us. So he says, look, the second objection was, how can this be a science if it's stories about Abraham? What the heck are you talking about? I mean, you could have the science of the history of Abraham, I suppose, and you can look for artifacts and archaeology to try to establish facts about Abraham, if that's possible, or to establish that there's no proof he ever existed or whatever. You could play that game, but that's not what the religious are doing when they're reading stories about Abraham. So the objection is, well, how can that be science? How can that be not science the way we mean it, but how can that be a legitimate path to truth? And he's saying, well, now hold on a second. You have to look. You're correct. They are stories. They are based around characters, but they're based around characters for two specific reasons. One, to establish the kinds of characters through which revelation was given, because that's relevant as you're considering the revelation. Whether they're flawed, in what ways they're flawed, what happens to their lives as they're transformed, how they come to this knowledge. That could be relevant for their thing that they're doing. And then, but first, the individual facts, meaning facts about characters, are treated of in sacred doctrine, not because they concern them principally, but they are introduced rather as examples to be followed in our lives. Now, this is something that I've been saying in a lot of other classes, but I'm not sure I'm in agreement with him. But I've been saying something about this idea in a lot of other classes, which is, if you were to sit and read Shakespeare and try to get meaning out of it and truth out of it, that truth isn't exactly propositional truth, or maybe some of it is that you extract out, but whatever you do extract out, that's an ethical principle about don't vacillate too long before doing what's right, or don't be blind to the collapse of the entire kingdom, because if you know something's wrong, you need to fix it, or something like that. Well, it doesn't really work. You can't really sum up Hamlet that way. I mean, if you look at Hamlet, the stars are showing catastrophe in the cosmos at the very beginning for the Night Watchman. And everybody knows throughout the play that Fortinbras is coming. I mean, they have to know. Oh, yeah, he's been dealt with. Don't worry about it. It's like you are all willfully blind because you don't want to acknowledge the fact that there's something really wrong in the court, which is fratricide. And clearly disaster's coming. um, you can't reduce that story, which is quid rides mutato nomine, right? Laugh all you want. The story's about you. Change but the name, and the story's about you, right? You can't reduce that story to some facts to follow. It's more like, hey, I'm holding up a mirror. This is what it's like to be a person. And he's saying something like that. This is examples to be followed. This in the moral sciences, right? It's like, if you make the mistakes of Jacob, here's the way you might end up still being a part of the kingdom, right? So I'm getting the characterological story, but it's talking about ways of being. It's not saying here's a fact to apply to you. Maybe you're not like that character, or whatever, So it's very characterological, which is too deep to just be reduced to things. Otherwise, we just reduce them and then not read the stories anymore. But the stories, we don't have to go into that anymore. So he makes both those points. And he says, look, again, we're not doing religion, but those who are doing it, it's legitimate that they do it. And I think I've proven now with reasons that it's legitimate that what they're doing can get them to a kind of knowledge and truth. Maybe some of the same truths that we're going to get to while doing philosophy, and maybe some that we can't get to while doing philosophy. And we'll see. but that's the only thing he was asking and the only thing he was answering. Okay. And again, he's not going to then go do religion. He's going to do philosophy. If you want to allow him to talk about there being a God, well, he's going to establish the existence of God at very, very soon. Okay. So that ends the third, or I think the second question, because we started over at the beginning yesterday. I'd like to keep going. Let me make sure. I know one individual asked for the link, and I think I already sent it to him. What did I just close out of? Oh yeah, okay, close out of that. Okay, if there's anybody watching on X who would like to join, you're welcome to come on camera. You're welcome to keep your face off camera. You're welcome to ask questions. I think I might stick to streaming on X and then uploading right afterwards to YouTube. But if we were on YouTube, people could post comments and then those comments could show up right here on the screen while we're talking. So you can, I think if you join, you're not able to do that. But if you join, I will take questions that you write if you don't want to talk or if you want to stay off camera. There's a private chat option here and a comments option. So if you want to do that, we can do it in text as well. But let's move on to the next question. So remember, I think there's 10 questions in this first part. And this first part is just before he really gets into the game. So the game kind of starts here. But before he's going to say, okay, let me sort of show where the border is between this country and this country. This is the country we're going to be in. This is philosophy. It's ruled by the rules of right reason. We're going to try to come to truth about ourselves and the universe and the nature of being and God and all this stuff. But we're not going to do it by saying, well, the Bible tells me so. We're going to do it by saying, okay, what's true about the world? Let's see. Everything I've ever interacted with is contingent, meaning it relies upon other things to come into being. It's not self-sufficient. It's not eternally existing on its own. This required a plastic factory in order to make it, and things come into being and go out of being. And so, well, if everything I've ever experienced is like that, what does that tell me, right? He's going to start with arguments that you can judge and analyze in your own brain to try to prove all of these things and see what can be known through philosophy. But before he starts, he says, okay, we're going to do that. But what's this other way of talking about God? There's this other thing that sort of has a two-way conversation with us. We might criticize things they come to because they contradict themselves. And here we are with our rules of right reason. We're certainly not going to let that go. So we might hammer on the religious from the outside and give some criticism, but they might have some revelatory insight that causes us to say, wow, I didn't know it was possible to think that way. And maybe now we have more questions than we had before. So they might hammer on us a little bit. We might, there might be a relationship between these two things that's complicated, where we might say, okay, look, hey, look at this. We came to the same conclusions you did. Maybe you came to the conclusion in a sort of character transforming embodied way that orients you in the world differently. And we came to a proposition, a QED conclusion, where we say, I sign off on the truth value of this proposition as yes, true. And so, okay, both of those might be valuable in different ways, right? So he's before we get into it, we're going to say, okay, well, what's the relationship? What's the border between what we're going to do and what this religious thing is? And when we get into it, he says, well, there's 10 questions. And the first question is it necessary that there even be something besides reason? Why not just philosophy all day, every day, and nothing else? And he answered that with his reasons for why it should be right that there be other ways of coming to knowledge. And now he's saying, well, okay, just because it would be necessary, do we really have it? Is it really a way to get to knowledge, that other thing? Because if it's necessary and it doesn't count, well, then we're in trouble. But he says, no, I think it is actually a type of knowledge. It just doesn't seem that way because it's not based on first principles. It's based on relying on the authority of something else. But lots of sciences do that. Chemistry might rely on the authority of physics to some degree, which might rely on the authority of mathematics. And okay, fine, that doesn't mean physics isn't a means of getting to truth. It's just relying on something else. And he says the religious science is relying on revelation. But if I can prove that it's reasonable that there would be a God who would give revelation, and there's going to be a lot of little questions that have to be answered to add that up. But if we get there, What's unreasonable about saying that, yeah, why wouldn't that be a means of coming to knowledge? Might be the best means of coming to knowledge for all we know. So remember, all he's doing is saying, with the rules of right reason, I'm not saying you should throw out everything else. In fact, I think some of these religious disciplines, whether they be mystical or church document based or scripture based or whatever they are, as a category, they're legitimate. Now, you can make a lot of mistakes over there, just like you can make a lot of mistakes in philosophy. He's not saying everything a religious person says is true because it's based on faith. He's not making any claims like that at all. He's just saying the overarching discipline itself makes sense that it would exist. And if it was done properly, it would be the type of thing that could get you to as legitimate a kind of truth and knowledge as physics or optics or music, knowing how to play and that type of thing. Okay, so now let's go to his next question. Whether sacred doctrine is one science or a whole bunch of different sciences, a whole bunch of different types of knowledge. All right. Objection one. It seems that sacred doctrine is not one thing, for according to the philosopher, that's Aristotle, right? That science is one which treats only of one class of subjects. But the creator and the creature, both of whom are treated of in sacred doctrine, cannot be grouped together under one class of subjects. Therefore, sacred doctrine is not one thing, one science. Objection two. Again, these are the positions he doesn't have, and then he's going to answer them. Further, in sacred doctrine, we treat of angels, corporeal creatures, and human mortality, but those belong to separate philosophical sciences. Therefore, sacred doctrine cannot be one science. How can that religion thing, even if it was done perfectly or properly, how could it be one science if it's talking about such disparate things as embodied creatures one day and what is the nature of the angelic another day and human morality, that's the ethical questions another day? Like, okay, it seems like it's a bunch of disciplines, not one. On the contrary, so he's going to give us his position with some quote from Aristotle or the Bible or something, and then he's going to actually give us philosophical arguments supporting it. So, on the contrary, Holy Scripture speaks of it as one science. Quote, wisdom gave him the knowledge, scientiam, of holy things. Okay, look up that verse. It's from the Vulgate. That's not his reason for why we should agree with him. It's very important to notice that just citing a scripture or citing Aristotle is not his reason why he must be right. He just tells us what he thinks and cites an authority, and then he gives us his reasons. So let's examine his reasons. I answer that sacred doctrine is one science. The unity of a faculty or habit is to be gauged by its object, not indeed in its material aspect, but as regards the precise formality under which it is an object. The formality of the object. For example, man, ass, stone agree in the one precise formality of being things that have color. And color is the formal object of sight. Hold on to your pants, buckle your belt. We're jumping into a very rich way of thinking that is scholastic and Aristotelian, and it's going to seem foreign at first, but we're going to dive in. We're going to jump in until we learn how to think like this, not because it's the best way to think or the only way to think or that we want to think that way, but we have to understand it. And it's not devoid of very valuable things. So let's let's read this sentence again, since to the ears of people who live in the 2000s, what the hell are you saying is maybe the first response. The unity of a faculty or habit is to be gauged by its object, not indeed in its material aspect, but as regards the precise formality under which it is an object. Okay, so let's say the unity of a faculty or habit is to be gauged by the precise formality under which it is an object. For example, three random physical objects agree in the fact that they have color, and color is the formal object of sight. Therefore, because sacred scripture considers things precisely under the formality of being divinely revealed, whatever has been divinely revealed possesses the one precise formality of the subject of this science, and therefore is included under sacred doctrine as under one science. Now, you have to remember how rich his view of ways of coming to truth is here, because he's not saying the only way to know anything about moral behavior, angels, or embodied creatures is to go and get revealed truth. He's going to know quite a lot about those things by doing this other game called philosophy, where he uses reasons to get somewhere. But what he's saying about the religious pursuit, which he has said would be necessary and he has argued is a legitimate way of getting to knowledge, is that it's one discipline because it's all grounded in revealed truth. So, whether that revealed truth is talking about embodied objects, corporeal objects, or angelic realms, or the existence or non existence of angelic realms, or ethical behavior, whatever it's discussing, what it's trying to do is, or no, what it's, let's use his words. And then let me use my own words to aim at the same type of thing, since his words sound so strange to us. What it's trying to do is give us the knowledge that we can have through a communicative, or at least an analysis of the communication to us from the divine, revealed truth. That's what it's about. That's not what we're about. We're going to do philosophy, but that's what that's about. And so it's one science. It's the science of listening to God when he tells you stuff. Okay. His reply to the objection: sacred doctrine does not treat of God and creatures equally, but of God primarily, and of creatures only so far as they are referable to God as their beginning or end. Hence, the unity of this science is not impaired. Uh, I see the point he's making there. Let's remind ourselves of what he's addressing in the objection. It seems the sacred doctrine is not one science. According to the philosopher, the science is only as one science treated one class of subjects. But okay, yeah, so it's all contained in here. But he's saying, like, okay, the first thing that you might think is that the religious discipline is not one discipline, because it's sometimes it's talking about how to live, and sometimes it's talking about what God's rules are for stuff about how to live. And sometimes it's talking about the fact that you have to relate properly to the family and to the society and to the angelic realm and to God himself. And it's like, okay, all of it is what you need to know about being a person that as it is revealed by the divine. Okay. So because of that, he wants to put it in this category of one science. This might not matter to us all that much if it's one or many. But we're learning as we go here. And this is why this first section is worth doing, about the way he thinks. And we're going to find, like with many strange novels, after a few chapters, we can fall into it and we can start to be like, okay, I get the way he's thinking now. Welcome, Mark. How are the blueberries? Oh, we don't have a microphone on yet. Mm. I assume they're delicious. We'll talk soon. All right. His reply to objection 2. Your mic is muted. Just to let you know. Okay. Reply to objection 2. Nothing prevents inferior faculties or habits from being differentiated by something which falls under a higher faculty or habit as well, because the higher faculty or habit regards the objects in its more universal formality as the object of the common sense. Like, okay, this is so rich what we're doing here. Common sense. We use that phrase all the time. This is where it comes from. Medieval philosophy here. Actually, it's rooted in the ancient. But you have vision, you have hearing, you have olfactory senses and taste, smell and taste. What is common between them all? That's what they're referring to by common sense. Okay? We talk about common sense like people commonly should have the sense. But what the philosophers are talking about when they invented the term common sense is what is common in all perceptions? What's the overlap? What's the thing that has in common? Okay, so let's try reading this again. And again, this is an answer to the objection. Sacred doctrine treats of a lot of different things, but those belong to different philosophical sciences. Therefore, sacred doctrine can't be one thing. We can already guess where he's going to go. right? We can already guess what his argument's going to be. It's going to be like, look, they all rely on the same foundation for getting there. So it looks like they're all about different things, but they're not really all about different things because they're all about studying the knowledge that comes from the divine directly to humanity through revelation. This is all using different words to say what I think he's saying there. So remember his idea of inferior and higher sciences is that arithmetic is higher and that someone doing optics might rely on the authority of the mathematician in order to do it. Okay. So nothing prevents inferior faculties or habits from being differentiated by something which falls under a higher faculty or habit as well, because the higher faculty or habit regards the object in its more universal formality as the object of the common sense is whatever affects the senses, including, therefore, whatever is visible or audible. Hence, the common sense, although one faculty, extends to all the objects of the five senses. Similarly, objects which are the subject matter of different philosophical sciences can yet be treated of by this one single sacred science under one aspect precisely so far as they can be included in revelation. Right? I think it's exactly the way I paraphrased it a second ago. So that in this way, sacred doctrine bears, as it were, the stamp of the divine science, which is one and simple, yet extends to everything. By the way, I have no problem reading something like this and saying, "Oh, I phrased it wrongly a moment ago," right? So I'm reading it to be like, "Okay, I said some stuff in my own words because I think I'm going to guess at and aim at what I think he's saying here." And if I read it and I was like, "Oh, whoa, 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 hold on, I said the opposite of what he's saying," I'd be happy to do that. But I think we got it. I think we got it. This is probably a question that's not at the forefront of our mind as something that's really important to settle. Okay. But it affords us the opportunity, and it does have significance. I'm certain of it. But studying the way he thinks, it affords us the opportunity of studying the way he thinks, which is going to be very helpful because very, very soon we're going to be getting into arguments that you're very ready to engage with and familiar with, like, does God exist and how can you know so? Um, so that's one of the benefits of starting with these questions. But he has more to say about this other thing, not the thing we're doing, this other thing of religion. The thing we're doing is using the rules of right reason to come to knowledge. And so far, he's said three things about that other thing. One, it should be necessary that such a thing exists. Two, it does exist and it is a legitimate way to come to truth. And three, it's a singular type of knowledge. It seems like it's about a bunch of different things, but really it's about what is revealed to us from the divine as applied to a bunch of different things. Now, the next question, and you see how carefully, like, you might think, oh, he's smuggling so many things in. No, he's not. He'll come to the question that's burning in your mind. Now he wants to ask the question, is it practical knowledge that you're going to get through that sacred doctrine? Right? Okay. Like, is this God revealed to me how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? But, like, what does that matter? Like, is all the practical knowledge with the philosophers or even with the scientists only or something like that? Or is there some actual practical knowledge that can be come to in that way? All right. So that's the question. He's now going to consider that question. So once again, we're not only getting used to the way he thinks, we're getting used to this awesome formula of his where he has a topic, a number of questions, he poses each question, and then he gives arguments against the position he has, then he states the fact that he thinks something else and usually quotes somebody when doing it. And then he gives his argument for why that is not the case. This is or his argument for why his position is correct. And then usually he has responses to those objections. I don't see them in this section, oddly enough. I wonder why that is. All right, well, let's do this rapidly. Oh, Mark, remember when we used to do this all 2 years ago? We used to have a rule, which is unmute and interrupt whenever you feel it. So there's no raise.
Correct. Yes, we did.
Hey, I can hear you. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Not bad. How are you?
Man,
Good. Getting go
aiming and
ahead.
I hope. Are you there?
Aiming higher. Yep.
I hope so. We're gonna.
Kind of choppy, but I can hear you.
By the grace of God, we might. Okay, so let's do. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something you wanted to say about what we're talking about?
Um, nope. Sorry, I'm just joining. Just joining now. I got the kid to bed and stuff, so just getting caught up.
Groovy, man. Groovy. Okay, cool. Well, remember, just interrupt, unmute, say, hey, shut up, slow down. I got a question or a comment or whatever. Okay,
Sounds
so
great. Will do.
groovy, baby. All right, so the next question he's going to ask is whether sacred doctrine is a practical science. Objection 1. It seems that sacred doctrine is a practical science. For a practical science is that which ends in action, according to the philosopher Aristotle, right? In his metaphysics. But sacred doctrine is ordained to action. Be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, James 1:22. Therefore, sacred doctrine is a practical science. Okay, this is not going to be his opinion, right? Because this is the objection. So the objection to his opinion is, it seems to me like sacred doctrine's a practical science. It's about how you should live often, and you should be a doer of the word and not just a hearer of the word. And if that's the end of it, then it's all about practicality. And the next argument that he's going to disagree with is further, sacred doctrine is divided into the old and the new law, but law implies a moral science, which is a practical science. Therefore, sacred doctrine is a practical science. On the contrary, every practical science is concerned with human operations, as moral science is concerned with human acts and architecture with buildings. But sacred doctrine is chiefly concerned with God. There we go. Whose handiwork is especially man. Therefore, it is not a practical, but a speculative science. This might be another question that, well, this is quite interesting. Let's hear his argument. That's just his position. Let's hear his argument. I answer that sacred doctrine, being one, extends to things which belong to different philosophical sciences because it considers in each the same formal aspect, namely, so far as they can be known through divine revelation. Hence, although among the philosophical sciences, one is speculative and another practical, nevertheless, sacred doctrine includes both, as God, by one and the same science, knows both himself and his works. Still, it is a speculative rather than practical because it is more concerned with divine things than with human acts, though it does treat even of these latter, inasmuch as man is ordained by them to the perfect knowledge of God, in which consists eternal bliss. This is a sufficient answer to the objections. Okay, so he states explicitly that he says that answers the objections there. Okay. This is interesting because remember, we can't wait to get into philosophy. We're here to do philosophy, but first we're going to talk about this other thing. And he's analyzing it and he's making arguments based on reason. He's saying, well, what is this other type of knowledge? It's a knowledge based on understanding things through divine revelation. And those things include everything God created, including man and man's behavior. And so it seems like it's a bunch of different sciences, but really it's one science. And it's primarily about coming to know God. God is the subject of that. There's plenty to say about man if you're talking about man coming to know God, but the end result is coming to know God. And so I say it is I'm going to keep trying to use different words which don't do injustice to the meaning, but which help us to translate his language as we start just for the beginning. There's something esoteric, there's something spiritual, there's something simply aimed there's something aimed at other than uh the point of this science isn't to help man out. You know what? I was reminded of something while we were reading this. The last time we mentioned Francis Bacon was dedicating his work on how to do science, and he dedicated it to the king. He sort of carved out some space for doing science in relationship to the body politic and the sovereign and the philosophers and all of this stuff. And so he had to address the religious and the philosophical and everything because he was going to justify playing this new game of science. And when he does it, he first is dealing with the king, and he dedicates it to the king, and he says, um, I thought about giving your majesty a gift that would aid you in the practical application of the ruling of your kingdom. And then I thought better of it, and I decided to write this book on how to do science, because that would be a tribute to the greatness of your soul that you would want to understand the world for its own sake. Right? So he's elevating the science thing to be like, this is about something higher than technology. It's about something more important than just practically how do you make a ball roll down a thing and calculate a whatever. This is about understanding the world just for the sake of having understanding. Similarly, while Aquinas wants to do philosophy, he's going to talk about this religious pursuit, and he's saying of that religious pursuit, it's much higher than a what are the rules I have to follow to get through life? It's actually about coming to know personally the divine, which might be something philosophy can do, and it might not be. It might be that philosophy can get as close to pointing towards it as possible, maybe. We can talk about that later. We've talked about it a lot in other classes with the consummate thinkers who basically all said, I'm pointing at something beyond this. But in any event, he's speaking of the religious, and he's saying this religious discipline, if it's done correctly, the attempt is to get to know God, which is the final end and the eternal bliss and the purpose of being and all of that. Okay, fine. Now again, if there's any groups of assumptions in here that you're not happy with, he will address them in other questions, right? So part of what we're doing is you got to start somewhere, and so there's other questions that will be answered as we've seen so far. So let's see if we can do one more. I'd like to get through this section so we can start getting into things that are this stuff is relevant and matters, and I'd love to talk more about it. If anybody's like, no, 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 let's go back to this question. I want to debate that forever. Like, you could. Libraries have been written on just one of these questions. You definitely 100% could spend a lifetime caring about just one of these questions. And we'll be happy to do that. Honestly, there's a link in the X post. Just come and join the cameras here and we can talk about it more. But my suspicion is that once we get through this first 10 questions that make up this first section, that we're going to get into stuff that people are more used to debating and thinking about, and there's going to be quite a lot of valuable ways of thinking in there. So we're going to get to that soon. So let's try one more question here. Whether sacred doctrine, remember that other thing, is nobler than other sciences. Okay, we said it was necessary. We said it was legitimate. Thank goodness, because it's necessary. We said it's one thing. We said that it's aimed at something beyond just practical knowledge. Now, is it the queen of the sciences? Is it higher than the rest of this? Does it rule over philosophy? Is it next to us and we're going to debate it? Well, where does it stand in relationship to the other ways of coming to know things? Objection one. It seems that sacred doctrine is not nobler than other sciences, other ways of coming to truth. For the nobility of a science depends on the certitude it establishes, but other sciences, the principles of which cannot be doubted, seem to be more certain than sacred doctrine. For its principles, namely articles of faith, can be doubted. Therefore, other sciences seem to be nobler. It's very interesting how he's qualifying what he's describing this sacred doctrine science, this religious faith-based way of coming to knowledge as. This is not his position, right? This is the opposite of his position, right? But it's interesting how I'm negating what's being said here. So anyway, let's keep reading. It's interesting that he's saying it's based in faith of revealed truth and that can be doubted. Now, he's not, that's being used to argue something he's going to disagree with. So maybe he'll also disagree with that. But Let's go on and see what he says. Objection 2. Further, it is the sign of a lower science to depend upon a higher, as music depends on arithmetic. But sacred doctrine does, in a sense, depend upon the philosophical sciences, right? For Jerome observes in his Epistle to Magnus that the ancient doctors so enriched their books with the ideas and phrases of the philosophers that thou knowest not what more to admire in them, their profane erudition or their scriptural learning. Therefore, sacred doctrine is inferior to the other sciences. Obviously, if you want to be a crazy person and say that you just have a bunch of ideas you believe for no good reason, that you might be in an insane asylum. We're not going to say, oh, that's fantastic because it's all based on faith. Like there's ways to do it badly and ways to do it well. And one of the marks of doing religious disciplines well is that the people there are extraordinarily reasonable, right? They're going to use reason as much as they can. It's not the schoolmaster as it is for us. When we're playing this game over here of philosophy, it's sort of the final boss. But that doesn't mean that they're being unreasonable all the time. In fact, he says, look, go and study these religious disciplines. You'll find all of the philosophy hidden in there. You'll find everything philosophers came up with utilized or answered or argued with or against or employed in order to try to understand the thing that God was trying to reveal to us or was revealing to us. And it's like, okay, um, now, he's bringing that up as an objection, which says, so therefore it must be a lower science because it's relying on philosophy. He's going to say, I don't think it's relying on philosophy in that way, but let's see what he says. On the contrary, other sciences are called the handmaidens of this one. Wisdom sent her maids to invite to the tower. Proverbs 9:3. So again, he'll give us his position without argument, and then he'll give us his argument. So let's see what his argument is. I answer that. Since this science is partly speculative and partly practical, it transcends all others, speculative and practical. Now, one speculative science is said to be nobler than another, either by reason or its greater certitude, or by reason of its greater certitude, or by reason of the higher worth of its subject matter. In both these respects, this science surpasses other speculative sciences. Okay, so this religious thing is both practical and speculative. Ultimately, it's speculative. That's the final aim of it, as he said in the last question, but it's both. But not only is it both, if we take the speculative side, it's higher than all the other speculative sciences. Okay. I can analytically reason about the laws of mathematics. Great. Can I do the same thing to come to know God? Well, that would be a higher aim. Okay. In point of greater certitude, because other sciences derive their certitude from the natural light of human reason, which can err, whereas this derives its certitude from the light of divine knowledge, which cannot be misled. Ooh, okay. This is getting difficult because obviously people can err in their understanding of divine revelation. He's not saying everything that the priest class tells you must be true because they can't err. Maybe the Pope in certain very limited contexts, according to Catholics, can be infallible, but even the Catholics don't say everything the Pope ever says is true. But he's not analyzing how poorly people do it, right? If we went to a biology lab and we said, hey, 90% of these biologists, when I ask them questions, don't really know how to think scientifically. But together, they're all doing something that's working, right? You don't throw out science because someone does it badly. And he's saying, hey, look, I'm not analyzing how people do it badly. I'm saying ultimately what this discipline is, if you could do it, if you could do it right, you would be basing all of your speculations not on things that are more subject to error, like what the game we're going to play, basing it all in reason, like the philosophers do, but in something that can't be wrong. It doesn't mean that any person can have it correctly or has had it correctly or anything like that. He's not making those other claims. It's very important to see what he is saying and what he's not saying because you might just throw up too many objections. What he's saying is that's a legitimate science. Maybe no one's ever done it correctly, but it's legitimate. Now, he still has to prove that God exists, that God wants to communicate things to us. He's going to deal with all those questions in the next section. But if we hold off on objections to that and just grant that, okay, there's a God and he has a creation and its aim is to know God, and it can't make it without God reaching down and communicating to us, and all of that is established as true, which it will be, perhaps. We'll examine that later. But given all of that, what's the relationship between that science and the other ones? Well, that would be the best one. That would be the most noble one. He said, hey, let's play philosophy. Let's do that. I'm going to do this whole book doing just things based on reason. But before I start, I want you to know there's a better use of our time. We could go do that. That would be more worthwhile if we could get it right, perhaps. So he's not just saying there's other ways of coming to truth. He's saying some of them are better. I really like this. I really like this because I like the quality of this, the fact of this, because it's very annoying to meet people who are good at something and then decide that you shouldn't ever say anything else is worth being good at. Be good at philosophy. Come and learn how to be better at it. Sharpen us and do it with us so we can all get better at it. But don't say basketball is not worth being good at too. It is. It totally 100% is. Religious discipline, Aquinas is saying it's not only worth doing, it's more worth doing than what we're doing. We're going to do it. This is worth doing. We're going to do it. It's going to be great. But that's worth doing too. In fact, it's more valuable probably. Okay. I like that. Be great at basketball, but don't go around saying investment bankers aren't doing anything good or people who know how to cook well are not. It's like just because you're in a certain pyramid and try, like there's an eye that floats above the pyramid that sees the landscape of pyramids, and that's that's a rare position for someone to be in, including very successful and important philosophers. We're reading Aquinas here, but he stands taller in this aspect than many others. I didn't say all others, but many others, because there are many who feel like this is the only game worth being good at, the one I'm good at. I don't see any reason to say that except just stupid masculine, I don't know what. Um, Problems in thinking. Okay, in both these respects, the science surpasses the other sciences, speculative sciences. So both the fact that it's aimed at a higher thing and that it has greater certitude. Greater certitude because the other sciences are based ultimately in human reason, which can err, whereas this one, if you can do it properly, it just happens to be by definition based in something which cannot err, which is divine knowledge. In point of the higher worth of its subject matter, because this science treats chiefly of those things which, by their sublimity, transcend human reason, while other sciences consider only those things which are within reason's grasp. It's like, okay, what am I going to study? Geology. How about interplanetary lithology? I'm going to study the geology of the lithology of other planets. Cool. I'm going to study the cosmos. I'm going to do cosmology as a whole. Great. Anything higher than that? Yeah, the divine, says Aquinas. You could study that. So, in point of what it's aiming to know and what it's based on, how it can know, it's just superior than the other speculative. Of the practical sciences, okay, so I probably shouldn't have used geology. Let's try again because that aspect of it was only relevant to the speculative. So, um, study study arithmetic, study all of the complicated pattern structures that can be constructed in the human psyche, and you could do practical science of applying those to different things that you discover in the world perhaps too. But no, just do mathematics. Study mathematics and understand these patterns. Great. Anything higher you could study? Yeah, the mind of God, the relationship with the divine. That's all he's saying, is that it's aimed at something more important, and he's saying all of those speculative sciences are based in something. The rest of them are based in human reason, which we know can err. This one, although it's done by humans and they can err, it's trying to be based on things that are coming from the divine, and that can't be wrong. We can misunderstand it forever, of course. You still have to do the work. There's millennia of debates and libraries of books that need to be written to try to sort it out. He's not saying it's easy, just, hey, God's over here. He'll just give you the answer to everything. It's not like that. He's not saying, oh, because you call yourself a priest, you're right in everything you say. He's saying, he wouldn't say something so stupid, obviously. But it's important for us to understand what he is saying. What he is saying is that science as a science, the thing that it's supposed to be doing that you should do well rather than poorly, is superior to all the other disciplines that you could do because it's foundationally based in truth that's coming to you from the divine, which can't err, whereas the rest of them are based on human reason, which we know errs all the time. And secondly, it's aimed at the most important thing, which is knowledge of the divine. Okay. Now he's going to say, since it's also a practical science, although that's the secondary quality to it, as he said in his last question, he'll compare it to the other practical sciences. Of the practical sciences, the nobler one would be the one ordained to a further purpose, as political science is nobler than military science. For the good of the army is directed to the good of the state. But the purpose of this science, insofar as it is practical, is eternal bliss, to which, as to an ultimate end, the purpose of every political science are directed. Hence, it is clear that from every standpoint, it is nobler than the other sciences. So even if you forget about the fact that it's primarily speculative and it's superior to the other speculative, on the level of practical, like how should I act and how should I relate to God and how should I behave and all of that stuff that's practical, its aim, right? The aim of the practical science of husbandry of horses is to take care of horses well. The aim of the practical science of the cavalry is to how to use horses in the military. The aim, that's higher, right? You have to know how to treat horses properly and develop them well in order to do that one, but you have to know a lot more. Well, the aim of the all military disciplines is the health of the state. Well, the aim of all politics, political science, is what direction should the state be aiming and in what way should it be restrained and how should it do its job and all of this. That's aimed to the health of the body politic. Can you get any higher? Yeah, from the practical dimension of religious studies, this is the highest. It's the aim of eternal bliss. It's the aim of being in right relationship with the divine, which is to be known by him and to know him in a personal way, which is salvation. Can you get any higher? He says. Okay, so even though the practical side is secondary, come on, guys. You got something better to care about? You got something better to think about? I don't think so. And this is what Socrates said. Socrates said, I gave up on physics, not because it was hard, not because I just didn't personally like it, because I realized it wouldn't get me to the ultimate truth I wanted. I gave up on practical science. I gave up on every subject except ethics. He says, ethics is how should we live? How should we live? What is the good life and how do we have it? What's a better use of your time than that? Says Socrates. Let's just do ethics forever. Let's talk about how do we get to knowledge of truth and beauty and justice and goodness. And his conclusion was you have to relate to the ultimate source of all those things. Okay. Aquinas might say, I think I could put it a little bit better, maybe not, but there's a lot of overlap and agreement there. So let's see what his replies to these objections are. Reply to objection one, it may well happen. Let's remind ourselves what these objections are. It seems like it's not nobler than the other sciences because it doesn't establish certitudes. It's based in faith, and faith can be doubted. Okay, his answer to that. It may well happen that what is in itself the more certain may seem to us the less certain on account of the weakness of our intelligence, which is dazzled by the clearest objects of nature, as the owl is dazzled by the light of the sun. That's also from the Metaphysics of Aristotle, I believe. Hence, the fact that some happen to doubt about articles of faith is not due to the uncertain nature of the truths, but to the weakness of human intelligence. Yet the slenderest knowledge that may be obtained of the highest things is more desirable than the most certain knowledge obtained of lesser things, as is said in De Animalibus, chapter 11. Reply to objection two. Objection two was further, it is the sign of a lower science to depend upon a higher. Sacred science seems to depend on philosophy. This science can, in a sense, depend upon, let's say it again we're trying to translate a lot of things here. This legitimate means to knowledge can, in a sense, depend upon the philosophical sciences. Not as though it stood in need of them, but only in order to make its teaching clearer, for it accepts its principles not from the other legitimate means to knowledge, but immediately from God by revelation. Therefore, it does not depend upon other sciences as upon the higher, but makes use of them as of the lesser, and as handmaidens. Even so, the master sciences make use of the sciences that supply their materials, as political of military. That it thus uses them is not due to its own defect or insufficiency, but to the defect of our intelligence, which is more easily led by what is known through natural reason, from which proceed the other sciences, to that which is above reason, such as are the teachings of this science. I won't translate that because I think now that we've translated a bit, it's starting to get pretty clear what he's saying. He's definitely using language that comes from the 1100s. It's a little bit not the way we're used to thinking in our post-Cartesian world, but I think it's starting to get not too difficult to follow along. Um, okay, we're beating this to death, but we're doing it so that we can get through this, and this is worth doing, by the way. But we're going to get through this, and we're going to get to the existence of God stuff and other fun things soon. All right, let's pause there. There's 5 more questions. So I think we've gotten through the first 5 questions of this section. So remember, the first, that's in 10 articles. The first section here is the nature and extent of sacred doctrine. Say, we're going to sit here and do philosophy. We're going to use the rules of right reason to try to see what truths we can come to. There's this other thing that's very similar in what it's talking about. It's called divine doctrine or sacred doctrine or revealed truth or religious studies or disciplines or something like that. That stuff, what do we make of it? We're over here. Are we going to look down on it? Are we going to say it's illegitimate and this is the only game in town? Are we going to say it's fair and we'll talk to it? Are we going to say actually it's fair and it's slightly nobler than what we are? And what we're going to do is going to serve it in a way where, this is just historically a fact. A lot of philosophical development in the rules of right reason came from seriously religious people who were trying to make sense of revealed truths or truths that they regarded as revealed and say like how can this be logical, and then they're inventing systems of thinking. So there's a two-way conversation between the two, but unlike my year 1 slides that we showed earlier where I say okay, religion is here and philosophy is here and there's a two-way back and forth conversation, criticism goes both ways, they assist each other. Aquinas is saying yeah, it's like that, Zara, except you got to remember the religion one is just a little bit higher. It's more nobler. It's partly speculative and partly practical, but in either dimension, it's more nobler than anything else we do based just in reason or in science. So cool. We know his position, and we're starting to learn both the pattern of how he does these things and also the way that he thinks and the types of words that he's going to use, and he's going to be breaking things down. We've also noticed into lots of little questions. So when he deals with the first one and you think I've got 18 objections, well, he's got 18 more questions to deal with all of those. And so it doesn't mean agree with him. It just means wait until you've read through, and then you kind of have to read through it a second time because you have to know what gets established. I mean, he's mentioning God revealing truths, and he hasn't even proven that God exists yet. Right? So it's like, what are you doing here? Am I supposed to believe in God? He's like, no, 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 you don't have to believe in God. You'll figure that out later when we get to that section. For now, and that section's going to blow your mind too, by the way. It's pretty impressive. You'll, but anyway, you're gonna get there eventually, but grant that for a moment. This is the question we're considering. And so he's going to deal with one question at a time, isolated from the rest, but then the work as a whole can be judged differently, where we could keep a list of objections and say, oh no, he answered that one. Oh, he answered that one here. I see why he didn't have a problem relying on this idea here because he establishes these 3 things later. So we're just going to have to do it that way because where else are you going to start? You got to start somewhere. I think that that's probably a good place to stop for tonight. Um, what I'm going to do is leave it open for people to come in and make other comments. And what we'll do is usually when we did this last year, we would end the live stream and then we would have like seriously the most amazing conversations when things were not recorded and not streamed. So that might happen, but at some point I'll end the stream and we'll have an after talk. And then we'll pick up again if I can. I think tomorrow, you know, we're just starting because I was hoping to have everything back in order where we could go back to having 8 classes, 12 classes a week and a regular schedule. I just said, look, let's just start. So it's turned out that we found ways to get here and we're just going to come back tomorrow, maybe Friday, maybe not till Saturday. I'm not sure what times, but we're just going to start doing this again and building it. And as soon as the stream is over, we'll upload it to YouTube. So, Mark, interject if you'd like to say some things. I know these questions seem a little bit distant from stuff that we normally would bang our heads against, but are there any reflections that you have on the way that Aquinas is thinking and talking? Any objections like, oh, come on, man, you can't be making arguments like that. That's pretty weak, or anything like that before we go into the after talk? And if not, I will just drop it and we'll go to the after conversation. Simultaneous sip. 3, 2, 1, go. Ooh, that's good stuff.
Three,
There,
two, one,
Mark?
go.
Yeah. Nothing like the simultaneity, right? All right. As I said before, there's stuff in Aquinas, little bits that are going to be highly important when everybody starts wondering if they're in a simulation or not. But we're not going to just read those little bits. We're going to read the whole darn thing because we're going to honor the humanity of all of this. And also, every bit of this is rich, and you could dedicate your life to any one of these questions if you wanted to. You really could. Many people have. Many people have. So we're gonna get a lot more out of it than just that. But hey, the Simulation University, we're gonna cut out. We'll see you tomorrow.